Thank you for joining my session. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the folks joining in from the various time zones. I'm sure you're enjoying this virtual Scottish Summit, and hopefully it's been quite a learning experience so far. Today I'll be presenting about GitHub Actions and Power Platform. I'll start with the very basics of what GitHub Actions are, how you can leverage it to do your CI/CD in Power Platform. I'll also dive into the advanced concepts such as debugging GitHub Actions. So there will be something for you, even like regardless of whether you are someone from Azure DevOps camp, or you are a citizen developer, or you're a pro developer. Before we dive right in, I'd like to thank ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Redspire, Agilisys, and Hitachi Solution for sponsoring this event. Your support makes global community events like this possible. Thank you. So about me, my name is Natraj. I'm a Microsoft MVP in business applications. My blog is dreamingincrm.com, where I blog quite a bit about Dynamics 365, Dataverse, Power Automate, and Linkpad generally. And my Twitter handle is Raj Yegnaraman. So if you have any questions about this presentation or GitHub Actions in general, Twitter is the best place to contact me. Before we even start exploring GitHub Actions, we first need to deal with the elephant in the room, that is, why GitHub Action? Why not Azure DevOps, as Azure DevOps has been around for a while? After we deal with this question, we look into GitHub Actions and Power Platform Actions. So Power Platform Actions are very similar to Power Platform build tools on Azure DevOps. So the last two items are my favorite in this session, that is how to debug an action. I'll show you two different approaches to debug an action, and lastly a demo where again I'll show you how to set up your GitHub workflow to do CI/CD. This is always a standard question when any new product is introduced that is quite similar to another that exists. For example, you can compare GitHub Actions versus Azure DevOps to Logic Apps versus Power Automate. These are distinct products, and people who use these have their rationale and reasons for using it. End of the day, use a product or tool that makes you happy, even if they do similar things. In terms of open source ecosystem, most of the developers are already in GitHub, so it makes sense to use Actions rather than Azure DevOps. It also plays well with the Codespaces if you are doing development entirely in the browser. Now let's compare GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps. By far the biggest difference between GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps is that with Azure DevOps, you have the capability to author your pipeline in classic mode, which is quite visual, but you do not have this option with GitHub Actions. It's entirely YAML, which you'd eventually learn to love after smashing through a couple of keyboards. Both supports multiple runners or build agents, as it's known in Azure DevOps. But with GitHub Actions, you can create new actions entirely in PowerShell and publish them in the GitHub Marketplace quite easily. This process is not as easy in Azure DevOps Marketplace. Microsoft has official extensions in both Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions. Although Power Platform Actions, they are still in preview. Lastly, you can use GitHub Actions extension for VS Code to get IntelliSense for GitHub Actions, check the workflow logs, and trigger new workflows entirely from VS Code. There is an Azure Pipelines extension for VS Code to author Azure DevOps pipelines, but it is mostly for syntax highlighting and IntelliSense. So now let's look at workflow. Workflow is the heart of the GitHub Actions. Let's look at some of the terminologies. So what is a trigger? It's very similar to what you have in Azure DevOps as well. Trigger is the one that is, trigger is something, usually an external event, that will start the workflow execution. So a normal trigger will be push. So when someone commits to the repository, you want the workflow to execute. Workflow dispatch. What is it? What is a workflow dispatch? A workflow dispatch means that particular GitHub workflow can be executed manually with some variables captured at runtime. So that's a workflow trigger. And I have given an example of 3 triggers, but there are like 15-20 triggers that you can use. So triggers is basically the external event that is going to start the workflow execution. And next, we want to capture some environment variables. So environment variables, one example could be like the data was environment URL. That could be an environment variable. An environment variable can be defined in several levels. You can define environment variables as a part of the workflow or the part of a job or on an individual step. So depending on where you want to reuse this environment variable, you can define it in 3 different levels. And in terms of like this whole relationship, one workflow can have many jobs, and each job will be running parallelly. So if a workflow has got 3 jobs, these 3 jobs will be executing parallelly, and a job can have a step, and the step has multiple actions. So the lowest in terms of granularity, the lowest one is action. So action is the task. So action can be as simple as a PowerShell, or a PowerShell or a command line script. So if you have like a third-party PowerShell commandlet, you can basically install that module and you can actually execute that PowerShell script inside a run step. So it doesn't always have to be like a really complex action. It could be like a really simple PowerShell script as well. You have the scope, you have the opportunity to use. You can go like really complex or you can go really simple. So that is the power of an action. So if you don't want to use like Power Platform actions, or you don't want to use like some third-party actions, you can basically write the whole action as a series of PowerShell commands. So that is how that's how flexible it is. So now let's look at what Power Platform actions are. Power Platform Action is Microsoft's official tool or extension for supporting Power Platform ALM in GitHub. Internally, it uses Power Apps CLI, so you can say it's sort of a wrapper for the CLI. We talked about runners in the beginning, which is basically the virtual machine where the action runs. As of today, you can use only Windows Runner if you're creating workflows using the Power Platform Action. This is the second biggest limitation at the moment. Since Power Platform GitHub Actions is still in preview, you also need to reference a specific commit ID or version because it's not published in the GitHub Marketplace. This is also another limitation at the moment. You can basically group the available actions into 2, solution level actions and environment level actions. Both of these actions use tools such as Solution Packager and Power Apps CLI to get the job done. In terms of also the another limitation regarding the authentication, this is what I think is the biggest limitation at this stage, is that you can't use a service account along with like your client secret or certificate for authentication. You can't even use multi-factor authentication. You can use only username and password to connect into the database environment. Eventually, because this is a big limitation, it should be eventually addressed soon or closer towards GA. Quick tip about the Power Platform actions, which will save you a lot of time, is regarding the arguments. So if you are composing a new workflow using Power Platform actions in Visual Studio Code, there is no IntelliSense for the parameters. So for example, if there is an unpack solution, how do you find out what are the parameters or the inputs for this particular unpack solution? For that, first clone this Power Platform Actions repo into your local machine, and in the source code, each individual action has got this YAML file. And if you actually open up the YAML file, you'll see exactly what the parameters are, along with some help text, so that you know what to pass to those ones. So, for example, this unpack solution, I know that I need to pass the solution file and solution folder, and you have the yes or no option. So pretty much like all these information will be there when it is eventually published to the marketplace. But right now, in order to figure out what the parameters are, this is the only way to find out, because there is no IntelliSense to do this. So this is a good tip that will save you a lot of time in the long run. We have looked at enough slides. Now let's dive into some hands-on demos and just see how we can use Power Platform actions in GitHub. So let's start with the sample repo. Here is a sample repo. I will share this link towards the end of the presentation. And this sample repo has got 5 workflows. So one of the workflows that we want to initially run is this initialize repo. What this initialize repo workflow will do is basically uh, export a solution from Dataverse and then use solution packager to unwrap the solution into the different components and commit the solution components. Basically, it will create a new branch, submit a pull request. So that's what this particular workflow does. So we would be creating the workflows and running the workflows from VS Code because that's where we don't want to switch we don't want to switch between the browser and VS Code and GitHub and like command line. Just too much multitasking. So we would rather want to do everything from VS Code. There is this amazing extension for that, which is called GitHub Actions. It's pretty generic by name. When you search for that in the marketplace, you get like what 4 matches, and the one you actually want is this one from this guy called Christopher Schneiden. So I'm probably pronouncing his name incorrectly, but that's the extension you want. After you install this extension, you get the small play icon on the left hand side. So that means that's the extension. After you have installed the extension, you need to do one more thing, is that you need to actually give access to GitHub. So that extension will use that credentials to connect to your repo and then look at all the workflows you have, maybe trigger the workflow. So in order to do that, after you sign in into your VS Code using GitHub, you need to go in here and say manage trusted extensions and make sure that GitHub Actions extension is chosen. So that will be once you do that, if you click on this extension, you should be able to see all the workflows and all the logs on that particular repo. So this particular repo has got 5 workflows. So I can see that basically it lines up with whatever I see on the browser. And now the first step is to set up the secret. At the moment, only username and password is supported. So that means I need to use a service account, and I need to specify the password for that particular service account in this particular area. So if I create a secret here, it is going to basically create it under the repo. So if I want to do it through the browser, what I'll do is I'll go into the repo, I'll click on settings, and then I'll go into the secrets area, and then I'll be able to add a new repository secret here. Rather than do this is a much easier way. I'm going to simply add a secret through here. So let me just add a secret just by clicking this plus button. So the new secret I want is called password, and I'm just going to enter my password for this service account that I'm going to use. So I have created my secret. I can't see that because it's all encrypted. So now it's time for me to trigger off this initialize repo action, the workflow, initialize repo workflow. So if you look at what this initialize repo workflow does is, it is triggered on workflow dispatch. This means it can be run only manually. There is no other external trigger. And I have specified variables or inputs, what they call on this workflow dispatch trigger. So the variables are application ID, username, environment URL, and solution. So these are the variables, and I also set the default value for these variables. So what this does is, it will basically use this Power Platform Actions repo. So since this particular since the Power Platform Actions are not published in GitHub Marketplace, this is the only way to reference them. You need to reference the repo, and if you look at the action name, you have a weird gibberish sort of text at the end of it. That is basically the commit ID. This is the latest commit ID as of second week of February. So this might have changed by the time you watch this recording. So you basically need to specify the commit ID. So I am just specifying the latest commit ID. So I'm using the clone solution basically to populate the repo. So I can run the action by right clicking on this particular workflow, and I say trigger workflow. This is possible because this particular workflow has got workflow dispatch. If any workflow does not have workflow dispatch, you will not be able to trigger the workflow. So the workflow needs to be triggered on the main branch. So I just press OK. So what is the application ID? I'm just saying, I'm just choosing the default. Uh, we don't really need the application ID because GitHub action, the particular this Power Platform action does not support application ID and client secret, but I just had it for incrementing the versions using a PowerShell script. So I just have it set up that way. So in order to connect to Dataverse for the Power Platform actions, I'm just using this user. It's a real user, and that's the URL for the particular Dataverse environment. So the solution that I want to use is GitHub solution. That's the one I want to use to export and unpackage. So I just press OK for everything. That I just took the defaults, and now the workflow is going to run. Like you can see, if I double click on this workflow dispatch, so each of this you'll actually start to see. If I just keep refreshing, you should start to see some messages here. So it's already started running. So let me wait for this to run. So I can see that the workflow has finished running. The good thing about this extension is I can see a quick summary of what happened, and if I want to dive in, I can basically double click on the each step. So each of this step is an action, right? So set up a job is an action. Then we have the checkout. It just basically lines up with whatever we have. So if you look at this one, it starts here, starts the checkout, then it runs the who am I, then it runs the clone solution. So it's basically each step inside the job. So I can also see the action, like the logs for the action. So if I now try to do a git pull, I should basically be able to see the thing populated. So if I go into the git and then I just say pull and then come back here, I should basically see the solution in the repo. I am not seeing the solution in the repo because it has created a pull request. So let me just go into the pull request. So if you can see, now there are two branches, there is one pull request. So after the workflow finished running, it actually created a pull request for me to merge into the main branch. So I can basically see the commits. I can see what has been committed. It should be basically whatever the solution packager tool extracted. So solution packager tool has, like you can see the standard structure, GitHub solution, SRC, other, all that. So I'm basically going to accept these changes. So let me just go into the pull request and I'm going to merge this pull request. I'm just going to confirm the merge. Now I can delete the branch. Now if I go back into my repo and do a pull again, I should be able to see the changes. So it's still pulling. Yep, now I can see a solution. So I can see the solution.xml, customization.xml. It doesn't have anything at the moment, but it's just to demonstrate. So, but you can see that that particular workflow, it's sort of it's actually seeded the repository. So in like 7 or 8 steps, it's just like under 70 lines, and it is able to connect to the Dataverse environment with the username and password, export the solution, create a GitHub branch, and create a pull request for the branch, and then the workflow is actually finished. So these are basically these are the steps it actually did. So you can already start to see the power of GitHub Actions. So how it's quite easy to read, and you can always do everything from the Visual Studio Code extension, this GitHub Action extension. So that was a quick workflow to demonstrate the power of GitHub Actions. So we looked at the initialize repo workflow that seeded the repo. Let's look at a couple of other workflows. Let's look at this workflow called commit solution component. What this does is very similar to what the initialize repo workflow did. And there is one difference. So what this particular commit solution components workflow does is also increment the solution version. Right now there is a update solution version action in Power Platform Actions itself, but I am using PowerShell script to do that because it gives me more control over how the solution version should be incremented. I basically want to have like the year, month, day sort of version number. So this is the format I want to use. So this gives me more control over how I want to do it. So this is also a good thing about GitHub Actions, right? So if there is something from Power Platform Action that is published in a way that you don't like, you can still use this XRM data PowerShell and also Wales PowerShell to write quick snippets and use that as an action. So I have written like 4 lines of PowerShell to increment the solution version using the set CRM solution version command. So that's also like, that you can see that you're not actually boxed into whatever is available in the marketplace or available in the app store. So and you export, once you increment the solution version, you export the managed solution, and then you also export the unmanaged solution, and you need to once again unpack the solution and commit into source control. Same as with the initialize repo, you need to create a solution branch, submit a PR. So that's how this commit solution component works. So this is currently running manually, but normally you would probably set up a cron job to run at like a specific time every day, so that you will have a backup of the solution in the source control. So let's quickly look into another action as well, which is the deploy solution manual action. So I don't want to explain it from top to bottom. Let me just explain some key actions that I use on this particular workflow. So one is this deployments one, the community action that I used to show the current version number that is imported into the target environment. So here I've defined the environment as production, so prod. So I use this third-party extension, and this is the message you will get when the solution is being solution has imported, I guess, into the environment. And I also check whether the solution that is about to be imported exists in the target environment. Why do we need to do this? Is because if the solution already exists, we want to import it as a holding solution, and if it does not exist, we just import it as a normal managed solution, not as a holding solution. So this workflow, I have some variables defined that say that I want to import the solution as a managed solution or unmanaged solution. So that is the solution type. So I'm just saying that I want to import the GitHub solution as a managed solution. If this is being done for the very first time into the target environment, you don't want to change the action, you don't want to change the workflow file to cater to the scenario where the very first time you import it as a normal solution, the subsequent times you import it as a holding solution and apply upgrade. So that's the reason I just check whether this solution exists in the target environment. And this particular steps can be conditional as well. So if you see, like, each step can have a if condition. So if the variable solution type is unmanaged, this step will be basically skipped. So when so these are just the standard Power Platform actions to import a solution. So I'm importing it as a so this step will run because I specified it's a managed solution. This step will run and it will activate the plugins, just like in the UI when we import it manually. There is a checkbox to indicate that the workflows plugins should be activated at the end of the import process. For a managed solution, the publish is automatic. But for an unmanaged solution, you have to actually specify this parameter called publish changes. So for managed solutions, automatically published. So that is okay. And there is a new action that has been released that is called upgrade solution. So after we import the solution as a holding, because the previous step we import the solution as a holding solution, the managed solution, the subsequent step should be to apply the upgrade to that particular solution. So that's what this upgrade action does. And additionally, I actually create a release on the repo. I upload the solution file as a release artifact, and then we just finish the deployment status. So that is pretty much how this is set up. Now let me try to run this manually, and then I will just show you how that basically will work. So I have deployed just like before. I will basically choose the default values that I have set up. I'm deploying it to sandbox. I want to deploy it as managed. So that is now kicked off. Now let's wait for this to finish deployment. So the workflow failed. So this is the error. The error is the solution env solution is not found in the target. So the mistake I made was not to have dollar. So because the variable names the mustache format, you always have the template strings, whatever you call it, mustache format or template strings, you always start with the dollar. So since I did not include that, I forgot that, it gave the error. So after I did that, it worked. So let's go and check how it imported. So you can see the environments. When I click on the environments, I can see the production environment, test environment. What was it? Did it fail? Did it succeed? When was the solution deployed? So I can see the information, and also this action creates a release, and then I can basically see the release version that was deployed into the test environment, and the artifact is also attached to the release. So that's pretty much how the manual deployment works. So these were the GitHub workflows using the Power Platform Actions. So that's all well and good. You can create a new workflow and use the Power Platform Actions to do your CI/CD. But what if something goes wrong in your GitHub workflow? How do you troubleshoot your action or the workflow that contains action? So there are a couple of approaches for that. One is using another action called teammate. So you are using an action to troubleshoot an action. So there is an action called teammate that can be used for this purpose. Another approach is to use a self-hosted runner. Like I discussed initially, you can have a Ubuntu runner, Windows runner, or self-hosted runner. So you can use a self-hosted runner inside a Docker container to understand what is happening inside the runner, because runner is basically a VM. So if you have access to the shell on that VM, you can basically check whether the solution file is created, if there is any error, what are the errors. So let's look at these approaches. So when you are trying to debug a workflow, you need to first create a couple of secrets on a repo. One is actions_runner debug. Another is action_step debug. Create these two secrets and set the value to true. So this will give you verbose logs for both the runner as well as for the individual steps. So enable that first. Next, let me show you a sample repo, a sample workflow that has that action, the teammate action used for debugging the workflow. So all you need to do is just add this one single line, action teammate, and this is basically going to use teammate, and then it's going to give you a SSH shell URL, and you should be able to SSH into the VM and then run commands against the VM. So that's basically the runner VM. So let's run this action manually using the GitHub Action extension. So I can just trigger this workflow. So the temp action is running now. The debugging with teammate is going to pause this workflow for like an hour or so that you can log in using the SSH shell. So let's look at what the output is in the UI. So if I check, it's giving me this teammate. So it's printing it in this the loop. It's going to print like this for an hour or so. So all you need to do is you just grab this command called SSH whatever, and then you just type it into your shell. So now I am on Windows terminal. I have just chosen the Ubuntu WSL shell. So I am going to paste this command inside the terminal. So I'm going to simply paste this SSH command inside the terminal, and once I do that, it's going to take me to the teammate shell. So it's saying I should press Control C to continue. Let me just press Control C. Now I'm going to type CMD. So once I'm in CMD, I'm actually inside the runner. So if I just do a directory, I can basically see the whole the repo being checked out. If I go into solutions, so check the directory, you can see the GitHub solutions. So I can basically see the repo. So this is basically the solution checked out. So this is actually inside the shell. So if you want to run some commands on this shell, you can basically run it. So let me just quickly jump into the terminal. I navigate to this exact path, Microsoft Power Platform Actions, and this is basically the commit ID and dist pack tools. So if from here, this is the tools that the GitHub Actions, Power Platform GitHub Action used to package a solution, unpackage a solution, deploy a solution, all that. So let me just type up this command pack help. So this is the Power App CLI, and I can basically see it's using version 1.5.2, and it's got all these commands that are used. So if you want to run these commands inside the terminal, you can. So this is basically the the VM where the action is running. So this is your playground. So if you want to run some commands and just confirm that the files have been created, you can. So this is one way how we can troubleshoot using Teammate. So in order to get out of this shell, all you need to do is type exit. So you're out of the command shell. Now you type exit again. So now it's just out of the Teammate shell, and now the action will basically start to complete. So it's already running the post checkout steps. So this is how we actually get out of the Teammate shell. Now let's look at another method to troubleshoot the GitHub Action workflows. For this, you need to download Docker. So you can download Docker from docker.com. You need to download Docker Desktop. Since I'm using Windows, I'm going to download Docker for Windows. So download the Docker Desktop, install it, and after installation, you need to run this command called docker info. So if you run this command, you need to first check what kind of container is being used. So for me, by default, after installing, it is going to use the Linux container. You need to switch this to Windows container, because the self-hosted runner, we want it to run inside a Windows container, as Power Platform Actions support only Windows. So you need to actually switch the container to Windows before you even try to install the software for the self-hosted runner. So now you need to switch to Windows container. In order to do that, you can just right click on the Docker icon on the taskbar, and then you just click on switch to Windows container, and you get this warning about switching to Windows container. Now click switch. It's going to take a minute or two for this switch to happen. So now I have run the Docker Windows command again, the Docker info command again, and I can see that the OS type, it's now showing as Windows. So now we have switched to the Windows container. So next is actually to run an image that I have published on GitHub. So the image is in this particular URL, Docker GitHub self-hosted runner. So clone this repo, and then the help is actually on this repo itself. First you need to build the image, then you need to run the container. So let's do that. So after cloning the repo, I have opened the repo in Visual Studio Code. I first need to run a PowerShell script that will set up the environment file required by the container. So that PowerShell script is runner setup. So let me just run this PowerShell script. It accepts two parameters. So runner setup is this file that is on the repo. It accepts two parameters. One is a repo, and another is a personal access token. So the repo, I know that it is you need to use your GitHub ID, and then the repo where I want to use the self-hosted runner is SS Actions demo, and then I need to supply my personal access token. So access token is GitHub personal access token. That's the parameter name. So I'm going to paste something that I already, so that is the personal access token. And I press enter. Now, if you go into your actions.env, you should see that it has set up the actions demo URL, and also there is a token. This is not a personal access token. This is the self-hosted runner token. In order to set up a personal access token, you need to go into your profile, go into your settings, and then below that you have developer settings, and then in personal access token you can basically generate a new token. Make sure that you give it access to the repo scope. So once you set it up, then copy that personal access token and use it in the PowerShell script. After I have run the script, my container, the image is already, I need to first build the image, then I need to start the container. So in order to build the image, there is already on the documentation, I already given the commands. You need to use docker build /-t GitHub runner. That's the name of the container. So the name of the image. The name of the image is GitHub latest. So the Docker file is, so dot means the location. Since the Docker file is already in the current location, I'm just going to simply specify that as dot. So now I'm going to run this. It's finished building the container. It's finished running the image. Now I need to use the image to spin up a container. So I can use the docker compose up command to do that. So if I run docker compose up, it is going to use that image and it's going to start the container. So now we can see that the self-hosted runner is started running, and it's connected to GitHub and it's listening for jobs. So now if I go into my repo, if I go into the SS Actions demo repo, and if I go into this area settings, where I can see the actions, there is a section for self-hosted runner. Now it says that there is a runner that is idle. So what I need to do next is to modify an action, modify a workflow file, and say that it should use a self-hosted runner rather than the Windows latest or Ubuntu runner. So now let me just modify this workflow file temp.yaml. I'm going to change this line where it says runs on Windows latest. I'm going to change it to runs on self-hosted Windows x64. I can kick it off now, and I can see all the messages appear on the command line. So let me just run this. So it has initiated the workflow, and if I go into my Visual Studio Code, I can see that it's already started running the job build. In the meantime, I can also go into the Docker extension. So if you have VS Code, install this Docker extension for VS Code, and you can basically explore the file system of the running container. In my workflow file, I had specified the output as out folder and then the solution file name .zip. So now if I navigate into my Docker container using the Docker extension for VS Code, I can navigate into the action runner and then the solution folder, the repo folder. In the out folder, I can see that the GitHub solution file is created. I can also see all the log messages on the console, on the terminal itself. And if I have any issues with the runner, unlike the teammate extension, I have this additional folder called diag where I can actually see the runner and workflow logs. So if I double click on these workflow logs, double click on this runner log, I should be able to see all the details. And if I want to, for example, with the solution, if I want to download the solution to my local machine, I can basically download. I can just right click download and just download it to a specific location. And if I want to open this, I can just right click and say open. It's going to open the file from inside the container. This is a powerful method to troubleshoot your workflow, or you have some issue with the runner. This is a very good method to troubleshoot those kind of issues. So that's pretty much all I wanted to present in this session. So all the links that you might need to try this out are on the slide deck, and the slide deck should be available in the Scottish Summit app or on the Scottish Summit site. Once again, thank the organizers and volunteers for giving me the opportunity to present in this great community event. If you have any questions about GitHub Actions in general, you can always ping me on GitHub or on my Twitter handle. So thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of the Scottish Summit. Thank you.